My name is Meredith, and I am 34 years old. I stood in my brother's corner office on the 47th floor, staring at the man I no longer recognized. He had just delivered an ultimatum that made my blood run cold. Apologize to his new wife Brianna, or lose everything I built over 12 years at our family company. This woman had stolen my designs, sabotaged my presentations, and seduced my brother right under my nose. My hands trembled, not from fear but from pure rage. I looked at the family photo on his desk where our late father smiled back at me. I spoke one word. Fine. But I did not mean what he thought I meant. Before we dive into this story, I want to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If you have ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted completely, hit that like button right now. And if you want to see how I turned my worst moment into my greatest victory, make sure you subscribe and tap that notification bell so you do not miss a single twist in this journey. Trust me, what happened next will shock you. To understand how I ended up standing in that office facing the worst betrayal of my life, you need to understand where I came from and what I built with my own two hands. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, the eldest child of Robert and Patricia Holloway. My father was a self-made man who built Holloway Architecture and Design from absolutely nothing, over 40 years of blood, sweat, and tears. He started with a drafting table in a garage and transformed his vision into a company that employed over 300 people and designed some of the most iconic buildings in the Southwest. My mother Patricia came from old money and never let anyone forget it. She had married my father when he was still struggling, but somewhere along the way, she convinced herself that her family's connections were the real reason for his success. My brother Wesley came along 2 years after me, and from the moment he was born, my mother treated him like he was made of gold. I remember watching her fuss over his every accomplishment while barely acknowledging mine. When Wesley got a B on a test, she threw a celebration. When I brought home straight A's, she simply nodded and asked what I was making for dinner. My father saw things differently. He recognized something in me that my mother refused to acknowledge. From the time I was 8 years old, I showed a natural talent for design. I would spend hours sketching buildings, dreaming up spaces that existed only in my imagination. My father would sit beside me at his drafting table after dinner, teaching me about proportion, light, and the way a building could tell a story. He told me once that I had the gift he had prayed for, and that one day I would carry his legacy forward. When I turned 22, I graduated at the top of my class from Arizona State University, with a degree in architecture and interior design. My father immediately offered me a position at the company, but he refused to hand me anything I did not earn. He insisted I start at the entry level, answering phones and organizing files, just like any other new employee. Some people thought he was being cruel, but I understood what he was doing. He wanted me to learn every aspect of the business from the ground up. He wanted me to earn the respect of my colleagues through my work, not through my last name. I spent those first years proving myself in ways that most people never saw. I stayed late reviewing blueprints when everyone else went home. I volunteered for projects no one else wanted. I learned every system, every process, every relationship that made our company function. Over 12 years, I worked my way up through sheer talent and determination. At 32, I became the lead creative director, the youngest person to ever hold that position in our company's history. My designs had won recognition across the industry. I had built relationships with clients who trusted me with their most important projects. I was proud of what I had accomplished, and my father made sure I knew he was proud too. Wesley, meanwhile, had taken a different path. He was less creative than I was, but he had inherited our mother's charm and social ease. He handled business development and client relations, skills that complemented my creative work perfectly. When we worked together, we made a good team. Then 18 months ago, everything changed. My father died suddenly from a massive heart attack while playing golf with his oldest friends. I got the call while I was in the middle of a presentation to a potential client. I remember dropping the phone and feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. The man who had believed in me, who had shaped me, who had given me purpose, was gone in an instant. The grief was overwhelming, but there was no time to process it. My father's will left the company equally to Wesley and me, just as we had always expected. What I did not expect was what happened next. At the reading of the will, before the lawyer had even finished speaking, Wesley announced that he would be assuming the role of CEO. He said it was what our father would have wanted, that the company needed a decisive leader in this difficult time. My mother immediately backed him up, insisting that Wesley was the natural choice to lead our family forward. I was stunned. I had spent 12 years building my position in this company. I had the experience, the relationships, and the proven track record. But I looked at my mother's face and saw something I had always known but never wanted to admit. She had never seen me as equal to her son. In her eyes, I was simply the daughter who worked at her husband's company, not the heir who would carry on his legacy. I could have fought. I could have demanded a board vote or threatened legal action. But my father's body was not even cold, and I could not bear the thought of tearing apart everything he had built. So I accepted Wesley's leadership. I told myself that I would focus on my creative work while he handled the business side. I told myself that we could make this arrangement function, that family would hold us together. For the first year, it almost worked. The company thrived under our divided leadership. My designs won 3 prestigious industry awards. Wesley brought in new corporate clients who expanded our reach into markets we had never touched before. We maintained a respectful professional relationship, even if the warmth we once shared had cooled. I trusted my brother. Despite our differences, despite our mother's favoritism, I believed that Wesley would never truly betray me. I believed that the bond we had built as children would protect us as adults. Then Brianna Sutton walked through our doors 6 months ago, and everything I believed about family loyalty shattered piece by piece. Brianna arrived at Holloway Architecture and Design on a Monday morning in early spring, when the Arizona sun was just beginning to warm the desert air. She came with an impressive portfolio from a prestigious New York design firm, glowing recommendations, and the kind of confidence that made people pay attention the moment she entered a room. I was the one who approved her hiring. I reviewed her work, conducted her final interview, and decided that her talent would be an asset to our team. Looking back now, I can see how carefully she had orchestrated everything. She knew exactly which projects to showcase, exactly which words to say, exactly how to make herself seem like the perfect addition to our company. From her first day, Brianna commanded attention. She stood nearly 5 feet 10 inches tall, with blonde hair that always fell in perfect waves, and a smile that seemed to light up whatever room she entered. She dressed impeccably, always in designer clothes that highlighted her figure without being inappropriate for the office. Within a week, every man in the building knew her name, and most of them found excuses to walk past her desk. My brother Wesley was no exception. He suddenly developed an intense interest in the creative floor, visiting several times a day with questions that could easily have been answered by email. I noticed his lingering glances, his laughter at her jokes, the way he stood a little too close when they talked. But Wesley had always been a flirt. I assumed this was just another passing attraction that would fade once the novelty wore off. I assigned Brianna to a major hotel project, a boutique resort that would showcase her design skills and test her ability to work under pressure. She thanked me profusely, promised to exceed my expectations, and immediately got to work. For the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. Her preliminary designs were solid, if not spectacular. She collaborated well with the team. She met her deadlines without complaint. But then I started noticing small things that did not quite add up. Brianna asked unusual questions during our team meetings. Questions about company finances, about client contracts, about the details of deals that had nothing to do with her design work. When I mentioned this to Wesley, he laughed and said she was just eager to learn about all aspects of the business. He told me I was being paranoid. He told me I should be grateful to have such an ambitious team member. The manipulation started so subtly that I almost missed it. Brianna began spending extra time with our junior staff members, taking them to lunch, asking about their experiences at the company. At first I thought she was just being friendly, trying to build relationships with her new colleagues. But then I started hearing whispers that I had never heard before, comments about how I was difficult to work with, suggestions that I played favorites, complaints that I did not appreciate my team's hard work. None of it was true, but truth hardly mattered. The poison was spreading through my department drop by drop. I also noticed that Brianna's design style was beginning to look remarkably similar to my own. She started using color palettes I had developed, spatial arrangements I had pioneered, signature touches that I had spent years perfecting. When I mentioned the similarity, she laughed and called it coincidence, said that great designers often think alike, suggested that maybe I was the one copying her. I let it go because I had no proof of anything deliberate. She was new, she was talented, and perhaps I was just being territorial about techniques that had never been exclusively mine. Then came the family dinner that changed everything. Wesley invited Brianna to join us for a Sunday meal at our mother's house. I thought it was strange, but I assumed he was simply being collegial, showing the new employee some Arizona hospitality. What I did not expect was the way my mother reacted to Brianna. From the moment they met, Patricia Holloway treated Brianna like a long-lost daughter. She complimented her outfit, praised her career accomplishments, asked questions about her family background with genuine interest. By the end of the evening, my mother was holding Brianna's hand and telling her that she was exactly the kind of woman this family needed. I sat at that dinner table watching my mother show Brianna more warmth in 3 hours than she had shown me in 34 years. I heard her tell Brianna that she was the daughter she deserved. She said those words right in front of me, as if I were invisible, as if I did not exist. And Brianna just smiled, accepting the compliment with practiced grace, while shooting me a glance that I could not quite read. That night, I should have seen what was coming, but I was still blind, still trusting, still believing that my family would never truly turn against me. The first real sabotage came 3 weeks later. I had been working for months on a major presentation for Sterling Hotel Group, one of the biggest potential clients in our company's history. This was my project, my vision, my opportunity to prove that Holloway architecture could compete at the highest levels of the hospitality industry. I had poured everything into those designs, staying late night after night, perfecting every detail, until I was confident we would win the contract. The morning of the presentation, I arrived at the office early to do a final review of my files. I opened my computer and felt my stomach drop. Every file was corrupted. My designs, my renderings, my carefully prepared presentation materials, all of it was gone. I tried to access the backup files on our company server, but they were missing too. I called our IT department in a panic, but they could not explain what had happened. There was no virus, no system malfunction, no reasonable explanation for why my work had simply vanished. I was standing in the conference room an hour before the clients were scheduled to arrive, trying not to hyperventilate, when Brianna walked in with a sympathetic expression on her face. She said she had heard about my technical difficulties and wanted to help. She happened to have some designs of her own that might work as a backup, designs she had been developing independently for a similar type of project. She offered them graciously, insisting that the company's success was more important than individual credit. I had no choice. The clients were coming, and I had nothing to show them. I accepted Brianna's offer and presented her designs as a team effort, a collaboration between the creative department's best minds. The clients loved them. They praised the innovative use of space, the sophisticated color scheme, the perfect balance of luxury and comfort. Wesley stood in the back of the room beaming with pride, not at me, but at Brianna. After the clients left, he publicly praised her quick thinking and creative brilliance. Then he turned to me and asked what had gone wrong with my preparation, why I had not been more careful with such important files, whether I was perhaps taking on more than I could handle. I stood there in silence, watching my brother question my competence, while the woman who had almost certainly sabotaged me accepted his praise with humble grace. When I finally got a moment to look at Brianna's designs more closely, my suspicions were confirmed. Her work was clearly based on my preliminary sketches, designs I had shared with the team weeks earlier during brainstorming sessions. She had not created anything original. She had stolen my work, destroyed my files, and presented my ideas as her own. I told myself to stay calm, to gather evidence, to prove what had happened. But I had no proof. The IT department found no explanation for the file corruption. No one had seen Brianna near my computer. It was her word against my suspicions, and in that moment, I realized how vulnerable I truly was. I spent the next few weeks watching Brianna more carefully, documenting every suspicious behavior, trying to build a case that would convince my brother of her true nature. But while I was watching her, she was moving faster than I ever imagined. 3 months after she joined our company, Wesley called a special meeting to announce that he and Brianna were engaged. I sat in that conference room surrounded by my colleagues, watching my brother display a 4-carat diamond ring that must have cost more than most of our employees earned in a year. He talked about love at first sight, about finding his soulmate, about building a future together. My mother was there too, crying tears of joy, embracing Brianna like she was already family. I felt the room spinning around me. 3 months. They had known each other for 3 months, and already they were planning a wedding. I waited until the celebration died down, then asked to speak with Wesley privately in his office. I tried to be careful with my words. I told him that I was happy he had found someone, but that the speed of the engagement concerned me. I suggested that perhaps they should take more time to really get to know each other before making such a permanent commitment. I mentioned the strange coincidences with my files, the way Brianna's designs seemed to mirror my own work. Wesley's face transformed as I spoke. The brother I knew, the man I had grown up with, disappeared behind a mask of cold anger. He accused me of jealousy. He said I could not stand to see him happy because I was lonely and bitter. He told me that I had always tried to undermine him, that I had always thought I was better than him, and that he was tired of living in my shadow. I left his office feeling like I had been slapped. The accusations were so far from the truth that I did not even know how to respond. But I realized something important in that moment. Brianna had not just stolen my work. She had stolen my brother. The wedding planning began immediately, and with it came a new phase in Brianna's campaign against me. She used her status as the future wife of the CEO to demand changes that should never have been approved. First, she insisted on a title change. She wanted to be named co-creative director, a position that would put her on equal footing with me, despite her lack of seniority. I had worked for 12 years to earn my title. She had worked for 3 months, but Wesley signed off on the promotion without consulting me, and suddenly Brianna was attending executive meetings, offering opinions on company strategy, and making decisions that affected projects she had never touched. My mother Patricia became Brianna's most enthusiastic supporter. They went shopping together, had lunch together, planned the wedding together, and slowly, Patricia began to turn against me more openly than ever before. She started questioning my design choices in front of clients. She suggested that perhaps I was working too hard, that maybe I needed to step back and let fresh voices be heard. She praised Brianna's work while criticizing mine, sometimes in the same sentence. I watched my mother become a weapon in the hands of the woman who was destroying me. The second major sabotage came 4 months into Brianna's tenure. I had been working on the Henderson corporate campus, a $50 million project that would establish Holloway Architecture as a leader in sustainable office design. The Henderson family had personally selected my proposal from a competitive field of 12 firms. The contract was ready to sign. The celebration was planned. The morning before the contract signing, I received a frantic call from our client liaison. The Henderson family had withdrawn from the project entirely. They refused to work with our firm under any circumstances. When I demanded to know what had happened, I learned that someone had sent them an anonymous email containing what appeared to be private messages from me. In these fabricated messages, I mocked the Henderson family's taste, insulted their business practices, and called their company a vanity project for rich people, with no real vision. I never wrote those messages. I never sent those emails. But the Henderson family believed they were real, and no amount of explanation could convince them otherwise. A $3 million contract evaporated overnight. Wesley called an emergency meeting where he announced that I was being placed on probationary review pending an investigation into my conduct. He said the words with a straight face, as if he actually believed I had torpedoed my own project. Brianna sat beside him, holding his hand, her expression, a perfect mask of concerned support. The isolation accelerated after that. Brianna began reassigning my team members to other projects, claiming that she needed their skills elsewhere. The talented designers I had trained, the colleagues I had mentored for years, suddenly reported to her instead of me. She spread rumors that I was mentally unstable, that my father's death had affected me more than anyone realized, that perhaps I needed professional help. Wesley and my mother echoed these concerns, suggesting that I should take an extended leave to get myself together. I found myself increasingly alone. The allies I thought I had disappeared one by one. The reputation I had built over 12 years crumbled under the weight of lies I could not disprove. I started questioning my own reality, wondering if maybe I was the problem, if maybe I had somehow brought this destruction upon myself. But I was not as alone as I thought. Someone was watching from the shadows, gathering evidence that would eventually expose the entire conspiracy. The wedding was scheduled for a Saturday in late autumn, a lavish affair at one of Scottsdale's most exclusive resorts. 200 guests were invited to witness the union of Wesley Holloway and Brianna Sutton, a celebration that my mother Patricia had been planning obsessively for months. Every detail was designed to impress, from the imported flowers to the custom-designed invitations to the 12-piece orchestra that would play during the reception. The total cost exceeded what most families spend on a house, but Wesley insisted that nothing was too good for his bride. I received my bridesmaid invitation, not as a request, but as a command. Brianna said it would look strange if her future sister-in-law was not part of the wedding party. She said she wanted to start their marriage with family unity. She smiled when she said it, but her eyes told a different story. I knew accepting the invitation was walking into a trap, but I could not refuse without giving my family another reason to call me bitter and jealous. The week before the wedding, my mother made an announcement that felt like a knife through my heart. She presented Brianna with our grandmother's heirloom necklace, a stunning piece of antique jewelry that had been passed down through 4 generations of our family. My grandmother had worn it on her wedding day, my mother had worn it on hers, and I had always been promised that it would be mine when I married. But my mother gave it to Brianna, the woman who had known our family for 6 months, and said that she deserved to wear something that represented true Holloway tradition. I sat in my mother's living room, watching Brianna clasp that necklace around her throat, and I felt whatever remaining hope I had for my mother's love finally die. The bridesmaid dress Brianna chose for me was clearly selected to humiliate. While the other bridesmaids wore elegant gowns in flattering shades of champagne, my dress was a garish shade of orange that clashed with my skin tone and featured unflattering ruffles that made me look like a confused pumpkin. When I protested, Brianna said the color was specially chosen to complement my unique beauty. Wesley told me to stop complaining and be grateful I was included at all. The morning of the wedding, I arrived at the resort and began my duties with as much grace as I could manage. I helped Brianna into her stunning white gown. I arranged her veil and adjusted her train. I smiled for the photographer and stood in my designated position and pretended that everything was fine. I thought I could survive the day by going through the motions and then quietly disappearing into my own life. I was wrong. The reception began beautifully enough, with champagne toasts and elegant speeches, and the newly married couple dancing their first dance. But then came the moment Brianna had been planning all along. She announced that she had prepared a special slideshow to celebrate the Holloway family, a visual journey through the history that she was now joining. The lights dimmed and images began appearing on the massive screen behind the head table. At first, the photos were lovely. Shots of my father and mother on their wedding day. Pictures of Wesley as a baby, as a child, as a young man. But then the images of me began, and something was terribly wrong. The photos had been digitally altered. A picture of me at my college graduation showed me with a bottle in my hand and a drunken expression on my face. A childhood photo showed me throwing a tantrum that I knew had never happened. An image from a company event showed me in a compromising position with a colleague I barely knew. The audience began to laugh. First a few nervous chuckles, then louder amusement as more humiliating images appeared. My brother Wesley laughed loudest of all, slapping the table and pointing at the screen. My mother Patricia covered her mouth, but her eyes sparkled with entertainment. I stood frozen in my pumpkin-colored dress, watching 200 people laugh at fabricated moments of my supposed worst behaviors. When the slideshow finally ended, I excused myself and walked as calmly as I could manage toward the bathroom. I heard whispers following me, saw people pointing and smirking, felt the weight of public humiliation pressing down on my shoulders. I thought I was alone when I entered the women's lounge, but Brianna followed me. In that private moment, she finally dropped her mask. The sweet, smiling woman my brother had married disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. She told me that the slideshow was just a preview of what was coming. She admitted that she had targeted our company specifically after researching family dynamics and identifying weaknesses to exploit. She called me too trusting, too naive, too pathetic to recognize a predator in my midst. And then she made her threat explicit. She said that if I interfered with her plans in any way, she would destroy me so completely that I would wish I had never been born. I asked her what she wanted. She laughed and said she wanted everything: the company, the money, the family legacy that my father had spent his life building, and she promised that by the time she was finished, there would be nothing left for me but regret. I walked out of that bathroom and found my car in the parking lot. I sat behind the wheel and sobbed for an hour, crying harder than I had since my father died. I called my father's phone number just to hear his voicemail, just to listen to his voice one more time. His recorded message said to leave a message and he would call back, and then he offered one of his favorite pieces of advice: never let anyone steal your fire. I played that message 3 times, letting his words sink into my broken heart. By the time I drove home that night, I had made a decision. I would not let Brianna Sutton steal my fire. I would fight back, and I would win. I just needed to find out how. The next morning, I found an envelope that had been slipped under my apartment door. Inside were documents that changed everything I understood about what was happening to my family. The envelope contained financial records that I did not immediately understand. There were spreadsheets filled with numbers, transaction records, account statements from companies I had never heard of. A handwritten note was clipped to the front page. It said simply, "I found something wrong. Meet me at the coffee shop on 7th Street at noon. Donna." Donna Richards had worked in our accounting department for 15 years, She was a quiet woman who kept to herself, did her job with meticulous precision, and rarely socialized with the rest of the staff. I had always liked her but never knew her well. I could not imagine why she was reaching out to me now, or what financial irregularities she had discovered. When I arrived at the coffee shop, Donna was already waiting in a booth at the back. She looked nervous, glancing around as if afraid someone might be watching. When I sat down across from her, she slid the documents toward me and began to explain what she had found. During a routine audit 3 weeks earlier, Donna had noticed a series of payments that did not match any legitimate company expense. Large sums of money were being transferred to a shell company that appeared to have no real business operations. She traced the shell company through several layers of corporate paperwork and discovered that it was connected to Brianna's previous employer in New York. Further investigation revealed that Brianna had been funneling money out of Holloway Architecture since her second month with the company. The amounts were staggering. Over $200,000 had already been diverted, and the payments were accelerating. Wesley's signature appeared on the approval documents, but Donna believed he did not understand where the money was actually going. The authorization forms were buried in stacks of routine paperwork, designed to be signed without careful examination. Brianna had created a sophisticated system to steal from the company while making it look like legitimate business expenses. I asked Donna why she was telling me this instead of going to Wesley directly. She said she had tried to bring concerns to management before, and they had been dismissed. She said that since Brianna became co-creative director, anyone who questioned her was quietly pushed out. Donna was risking her job, maybe her entire career, by bringing this evidence to me. She did it because she remembered my father, remembered how he had built the company on principles of integrity and trust. She could not stand by and watch his legacy be looted by a con artist. Armed with Donna's information, I knew I needed professional help to investigate further. A college friend recommended a private investigator named Frank Morrison, a former FBI agent who specialized in corporate fraud cases. I met with Frank at his small office and laid out everything I knew. He listened without interrupting, took careful notes, and then told me something that made my blood run cold. Brianna Sutton was not her real name. Frank had run a preliminary background check and discovered that her actual identity was Brianna Novak. She had a history of similar schemes in 2 other states, targeting wealthy family businesses with the same pattern of seduction, marriage, and financial extraction. In Chicago, she had married the heir to a manufacturing company and systematically drained their accounts before disappearing. The family lost everything and never recovered. In Atlanta, she had targeted a successful real estate developer and nearly bankrupted his firm before being caught, but the victim had been too embarrassed to press charges, and she had walked away free to find her next target. Frank traced the shell company to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. He found documentation of at least 2 previous marriages, both to wealthy men, both ending with destroyed businesses and ruined families. He located one of her former victims, a man named Gerald Patterson from Chicago, who was willing to provide testimony about his experience. Gerald had lost his family's manufacturing business, his marriage, and nearly his life to Brianna's scheme. He told Frank that warning other potential victims had become his personal mission, his way of trying to prevent what happened to him from happening to anyone else. The pattern was devastatingly clear. Brianna researched family businesses with exploitable dynamics. She identified the most vulnerable target, usually someone emotionally needy or easily manipulated. She seduced her way into marriage, isolated the victim from their support system, and then systematically extracted assets until there was nothing left. My brother Wesley had been her target from the beginning. The job at our company, the impressive portfolio, the charming personality, all of it was carefully designed to draw him in. I was simply an obstacle she needed to remove. Frank and I developed a strategy. I could not go to Wesley directly because he would warn Brianna, and she would cover her tracks or accelerate her theft before we could stop her. We needed ironclad proof, enough evidence to convince a court and a jury beyond any reasonable doubt. And we needed to catch her in the act of something major, something that would make her crimes undeniable even to her most devoted defenders. Frank suggested that we wait and watch, let Brianna grow confident in her success, let her make a bigger move that would seal her fate. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. I had to pretend to be defeated while watching the woman who was destroying my family walk around like she owned everything my father had built. I had to smile and nod and accept humiliation while secretly building the case that would bring her down. It was the performance of my life, and it had to be perfect. The next 3 months were the worst of my life. While I pretended to accept my diminished role, Brianna accelerated her attacks with increasing boldness. She seemed to sense that I was weakened, vulnerable, ready to be finished off. Each blow landed harder than the last, pushing me closer to a breaking point I was determined not to reach. The third major attack came 6 weeks after the wedding. Brianna systematically stole my entire client portfolio, transferring relationships I had built over a decade to her own control. She sent communications to my clients claiming that I was taking an extended leave for personal reasons, and that she would be handling their accounts going forward. Some of these people had been my friends, as well as my clients. They had trusted me with their most important projects, celebrated my successes, supported me through difficult times. Now they were being told that I had abandoned them without even saying goodbye. When my clients tried to contact me, they received messages that appeared to come from my email account, messages I never sent. These fake communications confirmed that I was stepping back and encouraged them to trust Brianna completely. By the time I discovered what was happening, the damage was done. 10 years of professional relationships had been transferred to the woman who was stealing my life. Industry contacts stopped returning my calls. Colleagues who had once respected me now whispered about my supposed breakdown. My professional reputation, built through 12 years of dedicated work, lay in ruins. The fourth attack was even more devastating. One morning, I received a call from our head of human resources, informing me that a formal complaint had been filed against me. Someone had submitted documents showing that I had been embezzling company funds, signing unauthorized expense reports, diverting money to personal accounts. The documents were forgeries, but they were expertly done. My signature had been copied perfectly, recreated with such precision that even I had trouble believing I had not actually signed them. Wesley called an emergency board meeting to address the allegations. My mother, Patricia, stood before the directors and demanded a full investigation. She said she had always worried about my stability, had always feared that the pressure of working in the family business was too much for me. She suggested that perhaps I had developed problems that needed professional intervention. The board voted to suspend me pending the investigation. I was escorted from the building by security guards, carrying a cardboard box containing my personal belongings. I walked past colleagues who had worked beside me for years, people I had mentored and supported and celebrated. None of them would meet my eyes. They watched me leave like I was a stranger, a criminal, someone who had been exposed as a fraud. That night, sitting alone in my apartment, surrounded by the remnants of my career, I received a message from an unknown number. Someone had discovered where I lived. They had left dead roses on my doorstep with a note attached. The note contained only 4 words. "Next time, it's you." I called the police, but there was nothing they could do without evidence of who had sent the threat. I installed new locks on my doors and started sleeping with a baseball bat beside my bed. I stopped going out after dark. I jumped at every unexpected sound. But through all of this, there was one person who refused to let me fall completely. Uncle Raymond, my father's younger brother, had always been a quiet presence in my life. He served on the company board but rarely involved himself in daily operations. After my suspension, he contacted me privately and offered his support. He had never liked Wesley's arrogance, he told me. He had always respected my talent and my dedication to our father's legacy. He knew something was wrong with the situation, even if he could not prove it yet. Raymond had voting power on the board and influence with other directors who had known my father for decades. He promised that when I had sufficient evidence to prove what was really happening, he would stand beside me. He would help me reclaim everything that had been stolen. His support was the lifeline I desperately needed, because by then, my savings were running out. The legal fees from trying to defend myself against the fraud allegations were mounting. My professional reputation was destroyed. I had lost my income, my position, and very nearly my sanity. I seriously considered giving up. I researched flights to cities where no one knew me, places where I could start over with a new name and forget that the Holloway family had ever existed. I almost booked a one-way ticket to Seattle, planning to disappear and let Brianna have whatever she wanted. But then Frank Morrison called with news that changed everything. He had been monitoring Brianna's financial activities, tracking the flow of money through her network of shell companies. He discovered that she was planning something massive, a single transaction that would transfer 40% of Holloway Architecture's assets to her offshore accounts. The transfer was scheduled for Friday of the following week. This was it. This was the move that would expose her completely, that would provide undeniable proof of her crimes. If we could catch her in the act, document the transaction, and present the evidence to the authorities, we could end this nightmare once and for all. I put away my fantasies of escape and focused on the fight ahead. The week before the planned asset transfer was the most intense of my life. Frank Morrison and I worked around the clock to compile every piece of evidence we had gathered. We organized financial records showing the pattern of fraudulent transactions, tracing money from Holloway Architecture, through multiple shell companies, to Brianna's offshore accounts. We obtained copies of the forged documents that had been used to frame me for embezzlement, and had a handwriting expert prepare testimony, proving they were fabricated. We compiled Donna's internal audit trail, showing exactly how Brianna had manipulated our accounting systems to hide her theft. Gerald Patterson, Brianna's victim from Chicago, recorded a detailed video testimony describing his experience. He walked through every step of her scheme, from the initial seduction to the final betrayal. He showed photographs of the mansion he had lost, the business his grandfather had founded, the family that had been torn apart by Brianna's manipulation. His testimony was devastating, a preview of what awaited the Holloway family if we did not act. Frank's cyber expert traced the threatening messages I had received back to Brianna's personal phone. The dead roses, the warnings, the attempts to terrorize me into silence. All of it originated from the woman my brother had married. We had her communications with accomplices who had helped her execute previous schemes. We had records of payments she had made to people who specialized in document forgery and identity fraud. The case against her was overwhelming. I also retained an attorney named Victoria Chandler, a specialist in corporate fraud with a reputation for taking down white-collar criminals. Victoria reviewed our evidence and confirmed that we had more than enough to pursue both criminal and civil action. She prepared a complaint for the state attorney general, documenting multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. She drafted a civil lawsuit seeking damages and the return of all stolen assets. Most importantly, she prepared an emergency injunction to freeze company assets before Brianna's planned transfer could take place. Everything was ready to file simultaneously, a coordinated legal strike that would give Brianna no time to cover her tracks or flee the jurisdiction. But the investigation revealed one more devastating truth, one that broke my heart more completely than anything else. My mother, Patricia, was not merely a passive supporter of Brianna. She had been an active participant in the scheme from nearly the beginning. Bank records showed that Patricia had received substantial payments from Brianna's shell company, money that appeared to be compensation for her assistance in undermining me. Communications retrieved from Brianna's accounts showed conversations between the two women discussing strategy for pushing me out of the company. My mother had provided Brianna with inside information about my vulnerabilities, my habits, my history. She had helped plan the attacks that destroyed my reputation. She had knowingly participated in the theft of her late husband's legacy. I spent a long night staring at the evidence of my mother's betrayal. Part of me wanted to believe there was some explanation, some reason why the woman who had given birth to me would conspire with a stranger to destroy me. But the evidence was undeniable. My mother had chosen Brianna over me, had actively worked to take away everything I had earned. The wound from that discovery would never fully heal. Friday morning arrived with the Arizona sun blazing across a cloudless sky. I dressed carefully in a professional suit, fixed my hair, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me had been through hell, but she was still standing. Today was the day I would reclaim everything that had been stolen. Today was the day the truth would finally be revealed. I drove to the Holloway Architecture building, the place where I had spent 12 years of my life. Security tried to stop me at the entrance, citing my suspension, but Uncle Raymond appeared beside me with a board authorization that granted me access. As a director, he had the power to permit my presence on company property. The guards stepped aside, and I walked toward the conference room where my brother and his wife were preparing to transfer our family's legacy into their own pockets. The conference room was already occupied when I pushed open the doors. Wesley sat at the head of the table with his laptop open, finalizing the paperwork for the asset transfer. Brianna sat beside him, elegant in a cream-colored dress, reviewing documents with an expression of satisfied anticipation. My mother, Patricia, occupied a chair in the corner, watching the proceedings with the smug confidence of someone who believed she had already won. All three of them looked up when I entered, Wesley's face flushed with anger. He demanded to know what I was doing there, reminded me that I was suspended, threatened to call security, but Uncle Raymond stepped in behind me, followed by two other board members who had agreed to witness what was about to happen. Victoria Chandler, my attorney, entered next with a briefcase full of documentation. I walked to the front of the room and asked everyone to take their seats. What I was about to present concerned the future of Holloway Architecture and everyone associated with it. Wesley tried to object, but Raymond reminded him that board members had the authority to call emergency meetings, and this was exactly such a situation. Reluctantly, Wesley sat back down. Brianna's expression flickered for just a moment, the first hint of uncertainty I had ever seen cross her face. I began my presentation with the financial evidence. I displayed the records of fraudulent transactions on the conference room screen, walking through each payment methodically. I showed how money had flowed from our company accounts, through shell corporations to offshore accounts controlled by Brianna. I presented the documentation proving that the shell companies had no legitimate business purpose, that they existed solely to facilitate theft. I showed the pattern of escalating withdrawals, starting small to avoid detection and growing larger as Brianna's confidence increased. Then I played Gerald Patterson's video testimony. His face appeared on the screen, tired and weathered by the trauma of his experience. He described meeting Brianna in Chicago, falling in love with her charm and beauty, marrying her after a whirlwind courtship. He explained how she had gradually isolated him from his family, how she had turned his employees against him, how she had systematically looted his company until there was nothing left. He wept as he described losing his grandfather's business, his marriage, his sense of self-worth, and he pleaded with anyone watching to learn from his mistakes, to recognize the predator in their midst before it was too late. Wesley's face had gone pale during the video. He looked at Brianna with confusion, with doubt, with the first stirrings of terrible understanding. She reached for his hand, but he pulled away. I continued with the evidence of the forged documents used to frame me for embezzlement. I showed the expert analysis proving that my signatures had been fabricated, that the expense reports were forgeries designed to destroy my credibility. I displayed the communications proving that the threatening messages had come from Brianna's personal phone, that she had sent the dead roses, and the warnings intended to terrorize me into silence. Finally, I revealed the truth about my mother's involvement. I showed the payments she had received from Brianna's shell company. I displayed the messages discussing their coordinated strategy for pushing me out of my own family. My mother's face transformed from smug confidence to shocked denial, to something that looked almost like shame. She tried to speak, to offer some explanation, but no words came. Brianna's mask finally shattered. She leaped to her feet and began screaming that everything was fabricated, that I had manufactured the evidence out of jealousy and spite, that I was mentally unstable and dangerous. But when she saw that no one believed her, her demeanor changed completely. She lunged across the table toward me, hands reaching for my throat, screaming that I had ruined everything she had worked for. Security guards entered the conference room and restrained her as she continued to thrash and curse. Behind them came 2 uniformed police officers with handcuffs ready. Brianna Novak was arrested on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. My mother Patricia was arrested as an accessory, with money laundering charges added to her indictment. Both women were led from the building in handcuffs, past the employees who had watched them reign over this company for months. Wesley sat at the conference table with his head in his hands. He had not spoken a word since the video testimony played. He could not look at me, could not face the magnitude of his failure to recognize the monster he had married. The brother I had grown up with, the man I had loved despite our differences, had been used as a tool to destroy our family. His ignorance of Brianna's true nature protected him from criminal charges, but it could not protect him from the shame of understanding how thoroughly he had been manipulated. In the weeks following the arrests, the full scope of Brianna's crimes became clear. She had stolen nearly $500,000 from our company, and had been planning to take much more. Her offshore accounts contained the proceeds of at least 3 previous schemes, money stolen from families who had trusted her, just as Wesley had trusted her. The criminal trial took place 6 months later. Brianna was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. My mother Patricia received 5 years, reduced because she cooperated with investigators and testified against her co-conspirator. I attended every day of the trial, watching the woman who had tormented me face justice for her crimes. I felt no satisfaction when the sentences were handed down, only a profound weariness and a desperate desire to move forward. The company survived, though it required significant restructuring to recover from the financial damage. The board unanimously appointed me as CEO, recognizing that I was the only person with the experience and commitment to lead Holloway Architecture through its crisis. Wesley resigned from all positions and moved to California, unable to face the company or the community where his humiliation had been so public. He sent me 1 letter of apology, pages of regret and self-recrimination that arrived 3 months after he left. I read it once, then put it away in a drawer without responding. I was not ready to forgive him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. My healing process began slowly, tentatively, like learning to walk again after a devastating injury. I promoted Donna to Chief Financial Officer, rewarding her courage and loyalty with the position she deserved. I hired additional security and implemented new financial controls to ensure that no one could ever exploit our company the way Brianna had. Frank Morrison became a friend, someone I met for coffee occasionally, to talk about life and recovery. He reminded me that I had survived something that destroyed other people, and that survival itself was a kind of victory. I started seeing a therapist to process everything I had experienced. The family betrayal, the public humiliation, the months of psychological warfare. All of it had left wounds that would take years to fully heal. But I was determined to do the work, to become whole again, to build a life that was not defined by what had been done to me. At the company headquarters, I designed a memorial garden in my father's honor. It featured a small fountain surrounded by native Arizona plants, a peaceful space where employees could sit and reflect. On the fountain, I had engraved his favorite quote, "Integrity cannot be inherited, only earned." I visited that garden often, especially on difficult days. I would sit beside the fountain and talk to my father, telling him about the challenges I faced and the victories I achieved. I liked to think he could hear me somehow, that he was proud of what I had accomplished. I reconnected with old friends who had distanced themselves during the crisis. Some had believed the lies about me, and those relationships were harder to repair. But others had simply been afraid to get involved, and they welcomed me back with open arms. I adopted a rescue dog, a spirited mixed breed I named Phoenix. She had been abandoned and abused before being saved, and somehow caring for her helped me understand my own recovery. We were both survivors, both rebuilding our lives from the ashes of what came before. 1 year after the trial, Wesley called and asked if we could meet. I agreed to coffee at a public location, wanting to hear what he had to say without committing to anything more. He looked older than I remembered, diminished somehow, like the experience had carved away parts of him that would never grow back. He apologized with tears running down his face. He admitted that he had been blinded by manipulation, that he had failed me as a brother and as a business partner. He did not ask for forgiveness because he knew he had not earned it. He simply wanted me to know that he understood now what he had been too foolish to see before. I listened without interrupting, without offering comfort, without pretending that words could repair what actions had destroyed. When he finished, I told him that forgiveness was a process, not a single conversation. I told him that I did not know if I would ever fully trust him again, but that I was willing to try rebuilding our relationship slowly, carefully, with full awareness of what had happened between us. He accepted that answer with gratitude, and we parted with an agreement to meet again in another month. The deepest lessons from my experience took time to understand. I learned that family name does not guarantee family loyalty, that blood relation means nothing without trust and respect. I learned that sometimes standing alone is stronger than standing with betrayers, that the people who try hardest to break you are often the ones most afraid of your strength. I learned that success is satisfying, but inner peace is the true victory. And I learned never to let anyone convince me that my worth depends on their approval. Today, I stand at the window of my corner office watching the sunset paint the Phoenix sky in shades of orange and gold. Holloway Architecture has expanded to 3 new offices across the country. We have won awards, attracted amazing talent, and built a reputation for excellence that my father would have been proud to see. My relationship with Wesley is slowly healing, built on honesty and cautious hope rather than blind trust. My mother remains imprisoned and unrepentant. I have accepted that some relationships cannot be saved, that some people will never acknowledge the harm they have caused. When my brother told me to apologize to Brianna or lose everything, I said fine. He thought I was surrendering. He thought I was giving up. But I was really giving myself permission to fight back, to reclaim what was mine, to prove that the truth will always eventually emerge. I lost my brother for a while, lost my mother forever, lost the illusion that family would always protect me. But I found myself. I found my strength. I found the knowledge that no one can steal your fire unless you let them. If you are facing betrayal right now, if someone is trying to destroy what you have built, remember my story. Document everything. Find allies you can trust. And never, ever stop fighting for the truth. The people who want to break you are counting on your surrender. Disappoint them. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you find the strength to keep going when everything seemed lost? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and let me know. Subscribe to this channel if you want to hear more stories about survival, resilience, and the triumph of truth over deception. And please share this video with anyone who might need to be reminded that they are stronger than the people trying to break them. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Thank you for listening to my story, and for being part of this community. I wish you strength in your struggles, wisdom in your choices, and peace in your heart. Remember that you are worthy of loyalty, respect, and love. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. Until next time, stay strong and stay true to yourself.